We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating human slavery, human trafficking, child exploitation, and child sexual abuse material through disrupting networks and applying data technology and advanced analytics and intelligence.
Good evening. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm Karim Rajwani, and I'm joined by my colleague Michael Foles, and we are from ATAI. As we know, human trafficking is one of the largest crimes, possibly in the top 5. Yet the number of suspicious activity reports filed appears to be insignificant compared to the magnitude of the crime. Today, rather than focus on what is human trafficking, the different types, and the size of the problem, we will focus on the views of 5 different individuals from vastly different backgrounds who collectively have an enormous amount of experience in fighting human trafficking. At the other session, we heard from banks on their approaches in fighting human trafficking. Today, we will hear from experts from Homeland Security, investigations, technology vendors, and banks. Let me introduce you to our esteemed panel. Dr. Douglas Gilmer is a supervisory special agent with Homeland Security Investigations. He is permanently assigned as the resident agent in charge for HSI's Birmingham, Alabama field office, where he is responsible for DHS investigative equities in approximately 2/3 of the state. Currently, he is on detailed assignment to the DHS Center for Countering Human Trafficking in Washington, D.C., the investigative efforts of HSI Birmingham in the field of human trafficking investigations are well known, and they have been recognized nationally for their efforts. Doug is a frequent speaker and trainer nationally on the subject of human trafficking investigations and the building of collaborative multidisciplinary teams to effectively combat this crime. Doug will focus on what he has seen and witnessed. Doug will be followed by Boris. Boris is an Ohio-based professional with more than 30 years of experience in the financial services industry, serving the banking, capital markets, asset management companies in the areas of AML, enterprise compliance, fraud, and fraud management. He is a nationally recognized seasoned professional with deep industry experience in financial services from direct sales, consulting, and specialized in core banking systems, payment, risk, fraud, and compliance to product and channel management. He's extremely focused on link analysis, text extraction, predictive analytics, social network analytics, metadata extraction, identity extraction, and how AI impacts the future of banking. And Boris will focus on the few things that financial institutions can do to identify human trafficking, what is seen in human trafficking and what has changed over the past few years, and a few typologies in identifying human trafficking. Jonathan Bell is the president and head of client relationships management at RedCompass Labs, a payment expertise company supporting clients around the world. He's proud to support the work of Red Flag Accelerator, the gold standard in data-driven red flags and persona-based scenarios, which enable the detection and prevention of human crimes running through our financial institutions. Jonathan will focus on some of the key red flags based on his significant experience and the robust red flags database. Niki Pryor is head of digital assets, anti-financial crime at Verafin. She has over 20 years of diverse engineering and business leadership experience in the technology industry. Niki joined Verafin as a product leader in 2017, translating customer needs into enhancements to the organization's financial crime management software. As head of digital asset anti-financial crime, Niki brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to her leadership role, leading Verafin's expansion into the digital asset market with their all-in-one anti-financial crime platform for crypto companies. Niki will focus on some of the learnings from Verafin clients and Verafin capabilities. And finally, Freddy Massimi is an experienced bank employee with a demonstrated history of working in the financial services industry around fraud detection, prevention, money laundering investigations, and financial risk. He has a Bachelor of Science focused in criminal justice and criminology from Barton College, with over 15 years of experience. He is currently a senior financial crimes investigator at Truist Bank, where he works on projects related to money laundering, fraud, and human trafficking. And Freddie will focus on the sort of top 5 typologies in human trafficking investigations. What are the key indicators to look for when conducting an investigation, and the supplementary advisors, which are ever changing, and how do you stay on top of it? Now, given Freddie has to jump off, Niki, if I can ask you to swap with Freddie. Niki, you go last, and Freddie, you'll take Niki's spot. So with that, Doug, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So again, Doug Gilmer with Homeland Security Investigations, currently assigned to the Center for Countering Human Trafficking, which is the center at DHS. It's really the only center in the United States government that is solely established, funded, and run to manage and coordinate government equities, to focus on the issue of human trafficking, whether it's sex trafficking or labor trafficking. We support actual law enforcement operations. We support intelligence, case funding, training, and those types of things, not just nationally, but also globally. I think, kind of speaking from my own experience in Birmingham, but also knowing, what's going on around the country, I think that most people would agree today that, at least on the subject of sex trafficking, whether that be adults or minors, that the vast majority of the crime today is being facilitated online. I could rattle off right now at least 30 different websites or apps that people are frequently using to purchase commercial sex, whether that's purchasing sex from adults or minors. So much of that's happening online today. In contrast to, I think, for many of us, the way that we grew up seeing this type of crime portrayed in the media as being a street-based crime, people walking a strip or a blade or that kind of thing, and just flagging down, random passersby. Not that still doesn't happen some, but technology has definitely changed the way that we do business. From a financial standpoint, though, I mean, there is a financial breadcrumb trail that's established when using those various services, because they don't. Some are paid subscription services, but for others, the traffickers are posting these ads on these sites. There's a fee to post the ads on the sites. Many of these sites are hosted, pretty much all of them now, since the creation or the establishment of the FOSTA Act back in 2018 or 2019, the Fighting Online Sex Trafficking Act. A lot of these sites, they're now based overseas. And so we have folks, here in the United States that are, in essence, sending money overseas to fund a service that facilitates what is a specified unlawful activity back in the United States. And so, from that perspective, it gives us, it can also give us some additional teeth in terms of the way that we attack these crimes from a financial perspective. It is a financially profitable crime. We've done some of our own research and figured out, just in Birmingham, some of the victims that we've talked to, some of the women that we've talked, based on what they told us, based on clients that they see per day, the amount that they charge, that type of thing, that just one girl can make her trafficker between not he's not declaring that income. Um, he's not paying taxes on that income, and he's really using that income. He's using that cash flow to continue to foster or facilitate additional unlawful activity, whatever that might be, whether it's additional forms of exploitation, the illicit drug trade, gun trade, whatever the case might be. But we often see that human trafficking is, in fact, it's a crime of crimes. It's not. I don't think that we've ever arrested a trafficker who the only criminal charge that we had on that person was the crime of human trafficking. It just doesn't happen that way. There are always associated crimes, and we have to, I think, as law enforcement and as professionals in the financial industry or whatever, we have to think kind of outside that box and begin to realize that um, there are so many other crimes that are associated with this, again, such as money laundering, tax evasion, those types of things. And I always tell people that when we go into these cases, um, we always have to have a backup plan. The goal, hey, if we can arrest and we can convict on a human trafficking charge, that's great. Let's do that. But we also need to be working on the money laundering charge. We need to be working on the drug charges. We need to be working on all these other things because, quite often, I mean, well, number one, the cases are very hard to prosecute oftentimes, and a lot of that sometimes no fault of their own, but it's the victims in these cases are often not the best witnesses, and sometimes we don't want to put witnesses back on, or we don't want to put witnesses on the stand because we don't want to re-traumatize them. They're going to face a hostile defense attorney who's going to turn their life upside down. And even though we have laws in place to protect their past and what they've done, they're still going to find ways to interject, those comments and interject bias, into the minds of the jury. And so we're constantly looking for other ways that we can prosecute these crimes. And if we can send a person to jail, and we've done this, we had a case in which we had a gang that was trafficking girls here in Birmingham. Um, and we had a number of victims, but none wanted to testify because the gang was responsible for at least 12 killings, a number of shootings. Everybody was terrified to death. But during the course of that investigation, there was kind of a crack in the case in which we were able to insert an undercover to start buying large quantities of drugs. And at the end of the day, we ended up taking down this entire operation on gun, drug, and money charges. And the principal that we were going after is spending the rest of his life in prison, not on human trafficking charges, but on money, drug, and gun charges. And so, at the end of the day, justice is still done. The victims in the case still are seeing justice for what happened to them. It just looks a little different. But at the end of the day, like I said, justice is still being served. So we have to be creative about how we're doing it. We are seeing an uptick in labor trafficking cases. I think with more attention being placed on labor trafficking, um, we're getting more tips. We're seeing more cases. We're figuring out ways to be a little bit more proactive in these types of cases. Um, some of these cases are just as heinous and just as awful as the sex trafficking cases that we deal with. When you consider the deplorable conditions that some of these individuals are living in, and I guess probably over the last 2 years, the number of cases involving forced child labor or labor trafficking of children has also grown exponentially. Of course, a lot of that is also the result of an increased number of unaccompanied alien children coming across the border. They're in a very vulnerable position, and as we all know, the one thing that all trafficking victims have in common, whether it's sex trafficking or labor trafficking, is a vulnerability. And these kids that are coming across the border are in the most vulnerable position they can be. And they've got a host of vulnerabilities that are easily exploited. And again, the money that organizations are making and that individuals are making off the backs of these children is just an absolute insane amount of money. And so we also have to be smart about how we're working these cases, and how we're attacking the associated crimes that are involved with labor trafficking as well.
Thank you, Doug. Just I think you cut out, and maybe it was just for me. You mentioned an average female makes, and then it sort of froze. What was the number?
It was between 225 and $250,000 a year, is what they were telling us that they were making their trafficker each year, based on the number of clients they saw per day, the amount of money they were charging per hour, that type of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good stat to have in background.
Hey, Doug, 1 second, because I have to kind of conclude everything at the very end of this. You said $220,000 to $250,000 a year.
225 to 250.
Okay. Thank you.
And obviously, that's going to depend on location. It's going to depend on there's a lot of factors that that go into that. But
just in terms of if you take 225 to 250 per day, if you sort of divide by, I don't know, they probably work 365 days, but is this cash? Is it sort of daily deposits into ATM machines? Can you sort of shed any light on what you've seen, Doug?
yeah, so what we're seeing, we're seeing an increased use in the prepaid cards, where funds are being loaded on prepaid cards, and those cards are being used to move money, from one place to another. You can load a lot of money on a card and stick a card in your wallet, and you don't run the risk of being caught with a bag of cash. We're also seeing frequent bank deposits, and money orders, cashier's checks, that type of thing. Money that's being deposited into into a third party account, and then the same amount being quickly withdrawn on the other end. One of the things that we picked up on probably a year or so ago, year and a half ago, that has become a huge red flag indicator for us, is credit card cancellations. Charge cancellations, not necessarily the card itself, but so the trafficker or one of the girls will make a hotel reservation or motel reservation somewhere, and of course, in order to make that reservation, you have to have a credit card to make the reservation. Well, the establishment's going to authorize the card. Their thought process is because what they're going to do is they're going to show up at the hotel. They're going to say, "Hey, don't charge the card. I'm going to pay cash, when I check out," whatever the case might be. And they think that eliminates any kind of a breadcrumb trail. What they don't understand is that when they make that reservation, the card is authorized. There is an electronic trail. There's already something there. But we started seeing a high number of these charge cancellations at motels and hotels, and that became a huge red flag indicator for us, because normal people don't do that. You and I, if we're going to book a hotel, we're going to put it on our card, and we're going to check out, and it's going to go to our card, and we're going to pay the balance off. We don't walk around or have the cash typically to pay the room fees, at the end of our stay, at the end of 4 or 5 days, but they do. And so that's probably been one of the biggest indicators to us, here lately.
Yeah, I'd echo those comments, Doug. At some work I did at an institutional sort of modeling using sort of advanced statistical techniques. The rooms booked on a card and the charge reversed was probably the highest scoring characteristic. So yeah, very much so. Guys, any other comments before I pass it on to Boris?
One question for you, Doug. When you say third-party account, are we talking about like mule accounts? We'll open up the accounts, these just random individuals and then quickly withdrawn in like different geographical regions. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, sometimes the money's being withdrawn out of a different geographical region. Sometimes there are, multiple accounts or multiple deposits being made into the same bank, but in different locations in the same city at different times. We had a case probably 2 years ago now, year and a half, 2 years ago now, where the bank, it was actually a bank inside of a Walmart. They actually called us. That's how we found out about it, because they had they cut the individual off from getting money orders, and because they thought it was really suspicious, and that's how we were able to initially, get onto this case that spanned at least 3 states. But it was because one teller inside of a bank, inside of a Walmart, got suspicious, and so we certainly can't discount the role that the financial industry plays, in attacking this issue.
Excellent. Thank you for
Thank
that
you.
clarification.
Boris, do you want to go next?
You know what? I'm going to touch on a couple of points that Doug hit on a few things that I've touched through my involvement in detecting for this. He's spot on about 4 or 5 things, and I explained those as I kind of peeled the onion on my involvement. But I first got involved with this when Phil DeLuca and Ann Cunningham built the initial detection engine, and they were really looking at the transactional activity. And Doug talked about where that has gone from back 10, 12 years ago when they built it at Chase. And me working at Chase, or I used to work at Chase in Columbus. When I first saw what Ann Cunningham built with the SAS models, I was like, wow. And they did it because they wanted to see if they could actually do it and detect for it. Not because, it was a requirement by the regulators. So that was kind of fascinating, in looking at the transactional activity. But as we fast forward till today, that's changed a lot with all of the social apps that we have and the way you can pay in different ways. So it's a little bit harder to detect from the transactional activity. But like Doug said, there's so many breadcrumbs that if you know how to follow those breadcrumbs, and I'll talk more about that in a second, it's easy to find it and then look for the rest of the activity. But then I started getting involved in, actually I presented in front of the Attorney General's office in Columbus, where they had FBI human trafficking folks. And then, believe it or not, Ohio is probably, I don't know if a lot of people know this, Ohio established the first human trafficking court. And it was from Rob Portman before he became senator or congressman. But Rob established a court in Ohio where the victims weren't really victimized again. And not only did we establish a separate court for that in judges, but then we also established a way to track the rehabilitation of how do you put the individuals back into normal life, and are they following a normal life? So we had a lady that actually tracked that to see if it was really working. Once you get them out, can you really get them to normal life? And actually the statistics were kind of excellent for Ohio. But then you've got other states like Nevada, California, other states that followed that Ohio pattern. So it's actually it's working. Then I got a call from Karim's buddies in Toronto, and then I got involved in Project Protect. And that's when I started really working into the analytics side of this and how you can detect. So I've spoken at a lot of ACAM's local chapters on this, trying to show where you would look and how you would look. And I'm going to give you some pretty interesting stats. What we did is when so I don't know if you guys know, but Karim, Peter Warwick, Stuart Davis, Joe Mari, they won all these awards, and they won the awards because they actually did something. And then Verafin and other providers actually built the engine so it can now detect. So people in Canada used to call me and they're like, "Hey, you want to be interviewed?" And I said, "No, I don't want to be interviewed because I want you to follow the trail and tell me how is the process working? Are we getting convictions and arrests?" Um, and I got to give Canada credit. You know what? They've led the industry. And when they asked me to kind of be interviewed, I said, "Look, what we need to do is not make this an advisory notice. It is so easy to detect, and I'll show you the facts in a little bit. It is so easy to detect, but it's an advisory notice, and a lot of the banks are not going to go for it. All right, even though Verafin, Actimize, and some of the other ones have a detection engine, and I think you touched on it, Karim, earlier. When you looked at the 2022 SAR filing stats, 662 SARs for the whole year of 2022, for human trafficking. Really? Really? All right. So what we've been doing with ATII the last, I don't know, 2 years is really looking at if we use technology and data, and Doug is right. If you use the right data, you can find this, and it's not that hard. So we've been looking at specific cases that are coming out in the news. Kareem mentioned and Doug mentioned about the pre-auth, and then followed by canceling the authorization and paying with cash or other means. That was something that happened in Canada, and you know what? That was a tremendous, red flag that we weren't aware of. But what I started tracking for the last 7, 8 years from Project Protect on was looking at two segments. All right. There are probably 2 to 3 different profiles. And if you understand how to look for those profiles in your activity, it's easy to find. And let me give you about an example of one of the profiles. What we looked at is if you have a business customer, can you segment that in a certain category? And we looked at 2 categories. And there are 2 NICS codes where it's sports service places and then the massage parlors. Are you ready? Between United States and Canada, there's 873,000 of these entities in those 2 categories. 873,000. A high percentage of them don't have ownership. So I know we got all this stuff going around about UBOs and all of that. So one big red flag is, are you onboarding a business customer with no ownership? Red flag 1. Red flag number 2, I'm going to touch on this because it's my third pillar in what you said. They're staying below a certain revenue number, and they're doing that for tax purposes. So like Doug said, when you start looking at it, you're going to find tax avoidance, you're going to find drug trafficking, you're going to find financial crimes, you're going to find all kinds of different things. And that's what the data is going to point to that, but you need to be able to understand how to look for that. And one of the things we're going to do, the people that are going to listen to this, ask us, please send us an email because we will give you the checkpoints of how to look at the different types of entities or customers you have, to where you're not going to spend 2 days or 2 hours. You're going to spend 15 minutes and get to the bottom of it, because we know what they're doing. We know how they're doing things. So our goal is to educate you to look better and find it a lot faster. One of the other things that we saw is there was a bust in Virginia, and it was really the mayor. If the well, I don't want to offend anybody here, but if you really want to look for it, it's there. It's on your streets, because once they convict an establishment like a massage parlor, then they're forced to move out of the strip mall. And then actually we've seen where the strip malls have been told, hey, you can't rent to another massage parlor for the next year or so. So what we're seeing is they own multiple places, and they own and they move from strip mall to strip mall. All right. The other thing that we saw is in the arrest that happened in Virginia, we saw a third category, which we really had no idea. But like I said, I've evolved through this, and I know where to look for it. We know where to look for it because we have like daily calls sometimes when a new case comes up, and we're like, hey, can we detect for this? Is what we have today able to detect? And the answer is yes. So here's what we found out in that Virginia example. We looked up the establishment. We could not find it in those two NICS categories. So the 873,000, this specific example was not in there. And guess what? Some of them now are advertising in the as a chiropractor. So they're in a different industry category. All right, that's fine. But then why do you have on those social media sites where people are getting rated or these girls are getting rated? So why do I have a chiropractor being rated on a rub maps? And that was the big red flag. So now, Doug, I'm going to go back to your tax avoidance. Now, are we committing medical fraud? Because are the patrons going in getting a medical, charge? So to me, understanding the entity in the activity from the social media feed and the ratings is easy to find, but the rest of the breadcrumbs underneath are hard because the transactions then disappear. In some cases, they're there. In some cases, they're cash. In some cases, they're through Venmo, through other accounts. But once you start looking at three quick factors, the establishment, the number of employees, and the fact that they're saying they have 3 employees, but there's actually 16 girls advertised on their website and rated on social media. Those red flags are so easy. I mean, it is so easy. It's just basic, entity matching. And again, I'm going to close with this comment. Please make it a mandatory rule. It is so easy to detect. Verafin has it, because Kamea actually gave you guys the in others, so as I've evolved, the technology has evolved. It's there, but 662, come on, that should have at least 2 more digits in front of it.
Thank you, Boris. Yeah, echo Boris's comments. I think we're on a call at least twice a week on a number of cases. And, if you take these NIC codes, even if you take massage parlors without sort of, going beyond and just connect the massage parlors within your own organization, match phone numbers and email addresses to sort of these sex ad websites, and just look at that picture. That alone will raise so many red flags, and that sort of, shooting fish in a barrel type approach. It's relatively straightforward to do. Thank you, Boris.
Hey, Karim, I'm sorry, I have 30 seconds. I have one last
Sure.
comment. When we compare the human trafficking scrubs from all the different ratings, and actually it's worldwide, but for North America, when we compare that to the 873,000, there's about 4,000 or 5,000 that are really red flags. And those 4,000 or 5,000, if you multiply those times 4 girls, you're looking at, so think about what that number is. But you're not looking at hundreds of thousands of these entities that are misbehaving. You're looking at under 5,000 across North America. And you know what? Once they get arrested and they get moved, and Doug, what they get them for is violation of, some minor violation, because what I've seen in Ohio is it's too difficult to get the girls out of the facility, so they close them down for a couple of weeks, or they tell them to get out of the strip mall, and they move down the street. So it's a little difficult from end to end, but I think once you look at those 4,000 or 5,000, you know what? I mean, those are the big red flags, and we know what they are. So hopefully there's a way we can communicate this to you guys.
Yeah, and I think that this is probably one of the biggest areas of collaboration, the illicit massage business between law enforcement and the financial institutions. one of the greatest opportunities for collaboration there is, because these are very difficult cases. Just the cases that we've worked, we know that a lot of these places are making between $400,000 and $800,000 a year cash. But the networks that they operate in are very difficult. And like you said, sometimes it's law enforcement hasn't done traditionally a very good job. We go in, we shut down the business, and they just reopen a couple of weeks later. We've had to get pretty creative in the way that we've done some of these cases in order to get actual indictments on felony charges. But the financial networks that they operate in are oftentimes so complex and so convoluted that we need the assistance of folks within the financial industry, FinCrime professionals, to come in and help us sort this stuff out if we're going to truly shut this down.
Thank you, Doug. If I can just move people around, because I don't want to miss Freddy. So Freddy.
Well, look, I'm actually good until 10:15 now, so you're perfect. We're good. I moved things around.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Jonathan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, great. Thanks. Well, thanks for having me on the panel. Great discussion so far from the law enforcement end, and then what can we do about it, and making those entities and the connections there in Boris and figuring those out. I think you raised a really good question. If you really want to find it, it is possible to find it, and I'm delighted Freddie will be here a bit longer, because he's in the hot seat of the reality inside the bank of actually trying to find it, and he'll tell us just how hard it is. And it's all right for you guys out there saying all this theory, but I think there's a real challenge here. So RedCompass Labs, we work in payments. We've got 20-year standing business, probably about the same age as Verafin, but we're still young and hip. We're not old, that's for sure. The world is changing. We see the world pretty simply: payments good, payments bad. We spend a lot of our time helping banks typically get organized around modern payment transactions, moving from cross-border payments, instant payments, etc., etc. And of course, we know, as we've touched on already, that payments are moving outside the bank. Not every payment now goes through the bank. So it's a changing picture all the time. But as much as we help the banks enable good payments, we know that we're enabling instant transactions that can fly through that enable bad payments, so payments good and payments bad. And for us, Red Flag Accelerator is our major contribution to this fight against human trafficking and this corner of financial crime. So what is it? Well, the point of Red Flag Accelerator is to enable the banks like Freddy's and others, help them to know what they're looking for. Now, you raised the question, Boris, if you really want to find it, you can. But I think from talking to many banks, many of the overworked, very busy, deeply caring people in banks, some as big as Truist, but many smaller banks around the US, around the world, they're just overwhelmed with work they've got to do. So how do we take all this knowledge that's out there? Doug's talked about a lot, Boris talked about a lot, others have got parties. Well, we've done a lot of work to try and bring together some of that learning from across NGOs, from law enforcement, from the banks, from the regulators, into typically what are you looking for when you're looking for human trafficking inside the bank. Now, the bank has a lot of information from transactions, as we've touched on, ripping through, KYC, and there's gaps sometimes in this, and the banks can do better at that. But when you bring that data together, then you can start to see what's happening if you know what you're looking for. So what is Red Flag Accelerator? It's to try and help the banks understand what to look for, and then comes the how do you do that? And we'll get into Freddy's and Niki's world, because those are definitely parts of the answers. So we've got typologies for sex trafficking, for labor trafficking, labor exploitation. We've got typologies that help identify businesses involved in those trafficking and exploitation pieces. And Doug will know some, but we'll all know some of this. We've written it down and we've captured it in a way to serve up to the banks. And one that's come up, obviously COVID has inspired tragic creativity amongst criminal minds around the world. And one of those, I guess, consequences is this stratospheric rise in online sexual abuse sexual exploitation of our children, which is just rampant, which is horrific. All these crimes are horrific. They're on real people, our people around the world. It's horrific. So what is Red Flag Accelerator? Just briefly, basically, multiple sections, and it describes what is this crime. Typically, what sort of things are you looking at? And we've talked through some of these scenarios: money in and out of an account, credit card transactions that suddenly get reversed, hotel bookings, people who live in certain corners of red light districts potentially. Some of that is still today visible inside the branch, and we heard a little about some of these tip-offs that you get from people in the bank, but less and less as online payments, online transactions become more and more the norm. The behaviors are shifting, so we've got to look inside the bank and look at what's flowing through. But you've got to look at it by persona. Who are the actors in this tragic play? Who are the different people? Are they the victim? Are they the perpetrator? Are they just facilitators around the edges who are doing certain things? Or are they completely innocent parties who happen to be suddenly at age 40 getting involved in Xbox gaming in a big way that actually isn't a front for exploitation of minors on that network? So you've got to understand who you're looking for. So of course, there's all these transactions, there's information in KYC, you build up indicators specific to that situation. How do you build up an indicator? What's an example of an indicator? Something like incommensurable deposits and profits, for example. So there's a thing that's an indicator. Well, how do you define what that is? Well, we define in Red Flag Accelerator where to find that in the bank's data. Is that in your transaction? Is that in your KYC? Where is that? What field would you typically find it? So we can help the banks determine where it is. Now, we have this. I have this with me printed. I carry with me a big, thick 200-page book, which has got all this information boiled down into 9 different typologies: labor trafficking, sex trafficking, exploitation of children, etc. Over 350 different indicators, over 34 scenarios. It's about the actors in the play. What are they doing? What are we looking for? But you give that to the beleaguered analyst in the bank, and they're like, that's too much. I can't possibly consume it. I could throw the book at Freddy and go, good luck, Freddy. He's busy. The guy's really busy. So how can he bring this to life? So we're working on ways to make it accessible, digestible, and easy. So it's coming online. A new version on the portal will be coming out late summer this year, making it as accessible and as easy as possible so that the bank can know what they're trying to do. So that's one way to help bring this to life. Technically, we've got a bunch of analytics that can run in the background against these flags, against these typologies, to help you determine whether, for example, child sexual exploitation is happening in your bank's data. We've done that with some of our clients, and there'll be some press releases coming soon on what that finds. But really, and I'm now looking squarely at Niki with Verafin and all the good that Verafin does and companies like Verafin, the scale across many banks is that this knowledge, this understanding of what you're looking for inside the bank comes into the platforms that are widespread. If we can get that right, and these crimes are changing, as Doug well knows, they're changing all the time, got to keep that feedback loop going, get that information into the vendor platforms, really make that sing. And then, as Boris says, if you want to look for it and find it, you actually can. But it takes a little bit more than just, if you see that and you see that, bingo. Everyone's got a problem. Teams are too busy dealing with too many false positives. Proper context and understanding, such as what I believe Red Flag Accelerator can bring, helps suppress some of that noise and surface the things that really count. And let's go after them, I would say. So it definitely collaboration, team effort, team exercise. It takes all of us. We have got the intelligence. We do know. We have Boris's point. We've got the tech to do this now. We need to pull together and actually focus some time and energy on doing it. So I'll stop talking because I'm very interested to hear what Niki and Freddy are going to say.
Thank you. Let's see, what time do we have? It's 10. Freddy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Hey,
So
and
I'll
I
start
apologize.
with-
I have to jump off real quick, but I appreciate the opportunity. I intend to participate in the virtual event, and I've got some great ideas. I'm going to circle back to all of you in an email because I've got this great epiphany that I want to get feedback on from each of you. So
Thank you so much, Doug, for participating.
Perfect.
thanks.
Thanks, Doug.
Okay, Freddy.
Yep. So perfect. So Freddy Massimi with Truist Bank. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go over everything that everybody talked about today on today's session. And then, Niki, we can connect and kind of really looking forward to hearing about Verafin. So Doug talked about sex and commercial trafficking. His center in Alabama is the only center with adults and minors that covers this area. It's one of the main headquarters. Most of the crimes are facilitated online. There's 30 different websites to purchase sex acts just off the top of his head. Many of them that I will cover and go over here shortly. You know, the way that we all grew up on this call, primarily, you know, me being 37 years old, it was all knowing that it's street-based, that these individuals were walking the streets. But now what we see is a lot of these online ads, and as if we're all parents on this phone call, you know, me being a father to a 2-year-old toddler, just hearing about their siblings having phones and them having TikTok at 7, 8, 9 years old. And as a parent, that does scare me, because predators, they will do everything and anything to get in there and talk to your children. And it is super easy now. And so it is crucial, as you know, as guardians and as parents, to check your kids' phones no matter what it takes, just to make sure that they're not talking to those bad actors. From a financial standpoint, there are that breadcrumb trail. If you know how to find it, you can. There is a fee to post that ad, so it is easier to track for law enforcement. A lot of these sites are based overseas now, so it does make it a little harder, but there are ways around it. There are additional resources to tackle victims. Victims are not willing to come forward if they don't want to. They're just scared. Reason being is there's always that supplemental crime against their traffickers that they are scared of, which comes with money laundering and tax evasions and drug trafficking. Reason being is that if it's just simply soliciting prostitution, it's extremely hard to prosecute. So you have to hit them with the supplemental charges. You know, you have those hostile defense attorneys, you know, they're looking for other ways to convict. Average female, blew my mind today, makes $225,000 to $250,000 a year, depending on geographical location. Increased use of prepaid cards to use money, frequent bank deposits, money orders, cashier checks, and third-party accounts, which are mule accounts, quickly withdrawn in a different location. That is the way that these traffickers are moving that money very quickly. Illicit funds, as we all know, human trafficking, you have your high profit, low risk. That's why it makes it very, very simple to do, because it's in and out, in and out. There is an uptick on labor trafficking cases, deplorable conditions that they are living in 2 years, forced child labor, vulnerable positions, they're the most common. Working smarter in how they are working cases. So great stats on that, Doug, so thank you so much. Boris talked about how when he worked at Chase that the transactional activity was spot on when they built it, and how the end result came about. Fast forward to today with all the social apps we have today, and it's harder to detect, but the breadcrumbs are easy to find, and then talk about the rest of the activity as it comes about. Really great to hear that you're presenting in front of the Attorney General's office around human trafficking issues. You know, the courts established there where victims weren't re-victimized, and in that way you can track rehabilitation. You know, they're not recidivism, where they're not, you know, getting back in the so-called life. Nevada and California that follow that models as well. Great analytics. Boris, keep me honest on this. So stats around convictions and arrest. You really want to give Canada credit on that. Advisory notice, which I'll talk about here shortly. I'm afraid banks wouldn't go for it. In 2022, I actually just looked it up just to confirm that, and I was just mind blown. Only 662 SARs total in 2022. So you think about that, could that have a lot to do with COVID? You know, banks and other areas really weren't tracking that. They didn't know what to look for. They weren't educated on that. You know, two to three different profiles in the activity. If you have a business customer, which is sports services and massage parlors, US and Canada, of 873,000, they don't have owners. No owners are listed. So that is something that I think, you know, analytic teams as well as banks, your KYC, your CIP, all those areas can definitely do a deep dive on, because we will. Reason being is that, when you have something you bought up today, rubmaps.com, you have them comparing and reviewing chiropractors, which really is a red flag, because why are they doing that? Are they going under the radar? Compare $4,000 to $5,000 to true red flags across North America. Violations are minor, as we need to group all together. Did I miss anything, Boris?
No, there's one factor I didn't talk about, which is kind of interesting. In all the activity in Canada, what they did is they actually tagged their STRs with a special code on it. And I believe within our CMP, they had a specific group assigned to work human trafficking STRs. And
Correct. Yep.
what, that's actually, I don't know how well that's working, because my point was great, but what's the yield? Because if the bank is looking for it and they're tagging it, then what's the arrest look like at the other end? And I don't have the facts in Canada for how many of those were filed compared to the 662 in the US, but that will be an interesting fact to kind of get.
Yeah, I think every sort of initiative is tagged with a project name: Protect, Shadow, Chameleon, and the STRs are tagged, and that makes it easy from an analytics perspective, from FinTrack's perspective, to focus on these cases. I mean, the good news is, since Project Protect started, you're looking at about, I think, a 750% increase in STR filings. So that's the good news. Bad news is, compared to the magnitude in terms of the financial nature of this, it's still nowhere where it should be. I think law enforcement, prosecutors' offices really lack the resources to go after this. So it really becomes a funnel. It's not a criticism of them. Banks are stretched. I think law enforcement agencies and prosecutors' offices are even further stretched.
Yep, perfect.
And that's
Yeah, we definitely do. We definitely do use that FinCEN advisory. So when we do file our, a lot of people call it STRs, your suspicious transaction reports. We call them SAR, suspicious activity reports. So when we put that FinCEN advisory that goes to FinCEN, then dispersed to law enforcement, a lot of times, like my current team, I don't want it sitting in that system for 5 to 6 months. I'm going to pick up the phone and call law enforcement and said, hey, for example, there are multiple people living at this address that are linked. You may want to go check this out. And the good news is that we have developed great partnership with Homeland Security, FBI, and local law enforcement, that we can pick up that phone and call them, and they can get it to those proper groups. There was one this year where there was about 15 or 16 people living in the same they were using, how can I say this? They were using a motel as their address for their mailing address. And it just so happened where law enforcement went in there and they were able to save 85 girls. So that is a success. That's picking up the phone, acting quickly. And it's all about what to look for, following those breadcrumbs. I'll give you kudos to Niki as well as Jonathan. So we get these bulletins from Verafin weekly from Molly. I'm not really sure what her last name is. I forgot what it is. Kind of looking at those, I'm talking about those red flags. And then Jonathan, those typologies from RedCompass Labs of what to look for, the flow of funds, is it airline charges? Is it transportation? Is it rapid movement of funds? Is it those cash deposits in different geographical regions? What we've done is we've taken that to our data analytics team and let them build system-based fraud rules around that. And then boom, you have those alerts that just pop in. So kudos to you guys. It really does make a difference. You may not realize that, but when it comes time to just saving one person, that's what makes our job at banks really, really worthwhile. So
Thank you. Thank you, Freddie.
Absolutely.
So
No,
I'm
great.
actually really excited to hear from Niki and Verafin. We've heard great things about it. So Niki, take it away.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. This is all very informative, and I'm writing down some key things that I'm hearing from everybody, just to kind of bring back the team and have some more conversations, which is always the fun part, right? And but this is one thing that's been very obvious here, is that this is a very well understood crime, right? So the patterns associated with are understood, transactionally speaking, of course, and then we know that the key to identifying is through the financial entities. But we also know, and it's come up a few times here, that everyone who's working in compliance and fraud detection in financial institutions is they have obligations they need to meet. They're very focused on that and very busy with that. And then when there's something that is very important and horrendous, such as human trafficking, and then trying to fit that in and identify that within your regular other activities, efficiency becomes really important as well, and being able to be very clear about what's happening and use every bit of information that you have. So that's basically what we've been doing. We've been helping financial institutions for 20 years identify AML, meet their AML obligations, identify fraud, and then in the human trafficking, we're leveraging a lot of the same tactics. So we're looking at primarily three basic things. So very targeted analytics. So as we mentioned, there's very clear patterns and personas within this crime of the different people involved, between victim and trafficker and human trafficking fronts. So being very targeted in analyzing what you're seeing within the transactions in order to be able to identify those is key. But there's a huge amount of data that is also important and informs those transactional activity to add more context and really fill out the complete picture. And then really being able to be efficient in that investigative process and seeing what's happening visually helps as well. And being able to make those filings in a really easy and straightforward way directly to your regulatory body to make sure that you are passing this information on to law enforcement. And I know, Jonathan, you mentioned about collaboration, being able to share, findings across different institutions and the bulletins, et cetera, to be able to further inform everyone within the industry and kind of fuel them to be able to help as a collective group is really important. One thing that is come up, it seems to have been come up a few times here, is just the pace at which this evolves, right? So a lot of times in the past, historically, the red flags that have been coming out are very much based focused on tellers. So what is the teller interaction of potential victims coming in, and what to look for and how to potentially identify this and look into it further. But we're also living in a world that's rapidly evolving towards fully online. So online account opening, quicker, faster payments, those using cards and things instead of cash. All of that is happening in front of us, and we really need to make sure we're enabling financial entities to continue to evolve to this as well, and know what to look for and change kind of their approaches, and help them do that in a really efficient way. So I talked about targeted analytics and data, and I'll dig into those a little bit, but these traffickers are evolving very, very quickly. So technology is really key in that, and the data is very key. We have a vast amount of data. We should be using it. So one way that we've been helping financial institutions with these investigations is through targeted analytics. So we know that we can cast a broad net, but we understand these patterns very well, and we know if we're looking for everything all the time, then we'll just have a ton of alerts to look through, and we won't be able to identify and spend real, true human thinking power on the really important ones. So being able to be very targeted in what you're looking for a potential victim versus a potential trafficker, and then the front is or separating them and looking at them separately is very important, because we know what a person who's free to walk through their life, what their transactions look like. They're paying their bills, they're paying their rent or mortgage, they're shopping and grocery shopping, et cetera. A potential trafficking victim isn't transacting in the same way, potentially, right? Or especially if they're then falling within the risky age range for a trafficking victim, and then they're moving from hotel to hotel, and you're seeing these different types of hotel charges and different very small transactional charges at fast food establishments or drugstores, et cetera. You're really not, it's not the typical way that an investigator is kind of conducting their typical AML program, right? It's different types of transactions that you're looking for. But then something that's also important is the data. So you can look at the transactions, and they start to they fit that pattern. But then being able to layer on additional data, like scrubbing those adult ad sites for emails and phone numbers, as Boris, Karim mentioned earlier, to really then be matching those with your customer base and seeing where there are. Then you layer that on top of the transactions, and you see that there are matches or there are payments to these types of sites within those transactions. It really starts to kind of bring these to the top so that you can focus in on the potential for risk. So that data is very, very important. And the third piece is kind of building a story visually. So maps, and we found that kind of being able to overlay a lot of these things onto a map starts to tell a very clear story. So you can start to see movement of these transactions. For example, we know that trafficking victims are often moved around very, very frequently. So if you start to see all of the pattern transactional activity that you expect, and then you can see that they're moving along an interstate or they're moving towards large, sporting events and things like that, you can start to really kind of layer on the certainty of potential crime and potential human trafficking risk. And then further dive in and investigate there. So, I mean, I think it's really, from our perspective, it's about being very targeted in what you're looking for, and then fueling all of that with more information so you can really build out a bigger picture. And that, from our perspective, really just further enables investigators to actually act and get that information to law enforcement in a timely manner, such that action can be taken and we can really move some of these victims into survivorhood instead of kind of being trapped where they are.
Thank you, Niki. That is fascinating. Any other thoughts, comments, Boris, Jonathan, Freddy?
Hey, Karim, I have a question actually for Niki and for Freddy.
Sure.
When we look at these cases that are in the news, I went to the data providers like WorldCheck and Dow Jones, and I said, hey, do you have a category in your watch list? Because you got PEPs, you got close associates, and you got sanction entities, and then you've got financial crimes. And so I said, are these human trafficking arrests making it in your database? The answer is no. So my question to you guys is, if you had let's call it a negative news for a better word, if you had a feed that says, hey, in Columbus, Ohio, there were 2 arrests, and in Virginia, there were 4 arrests the last couple of days in convictions, and you have the person's name or the business name, then were you getting that data to find that red flag saying, hey, this is a customer of mine, red flag, they just got arrested a couple of days ago for human trafficking? Because it's not in WorldCheck and Dow Jones, so is somebody else providing that to you from just basic arrest and convictions?
Yes. So I'll if you don't, do you mind if I answer, Niki? Okay. So when I first started this role, I went to moneylaundering.com and I literally signed up for every single alert related to Department of Justice. Department of Justice will send you real-time alerts, because to exit a relationship just based off a charge, it's very hard to do. But if they are indicted and arrested, and you can prove that they're out of your reputational risk and out of that bank's risk appetite, go ahead and sign up for those Department of Justice alerts. You'll get them from every single state directly emailed to your mailbox, that you can then create your negative news based monitoring for. Then that way a certain team at the bank or wherever you may be can handle those.
Okay.
And it's great. And knock on wood, it's actually worked extremely well, because in the very beginning it was very manual. We'll say so and so is arrested for child pornography charges. But let's go back, and they always say child pornography. I don't like that word. I like CSAM. It just fits a little better, and proving that, immediate exit. We don't want that. We don't want to tie to Truist Bank. But then you have other categories where they're hit with like money laundering and COVID-19 fraud and PPP loan fraud. And then when you do your negative news searches, you find those other charges. So it does work well.
Yeah.
for
Just
questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, am I right? Just a quick one for Niki. You've just outlined exactly what I would hope to hear from you guys. I think that's exactly what you need to do. Targeted analytics, suppress some of the noise, surface of things that are real based on proper context and understanding. I think we're on the same page there. And also with external data coming in, finding some of your customer details out there in the various dark corners where, as you say, the normal person going about their lives, they're not there, they're not doing that. I think that's really key as well. And then how you visualize that's really important. But I think there's still, so that sounds like we've got the perfect solution, and maybe we have got it in capability wise. But I think if we just hark back to the 662 SARS in the US last year, we've got a ways to go to make this a reality. And that's back to the collaboration point. I think maybe some of what we can bring in Red Flag Accelerator together with what you can bring, working with a Freddy, a Truist or a bank like that, using some of the tips and techniques that Boris's tech has got. There's ways to do this to actually solve so many more of these crimes, and I think we need to keep the conversation going and make this possible. So I think there's a few
Absolutely.
follow-up conversations after this. I'll definitely be in touch. I want to talk some more when Karim throws us off because we've all talked too much. There's a conversation that we've barely started, I think.
Absolutely. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
It's barely started and it could go on forever, but hopefully not, right?
It is, yeah. And Kareem is talking to our whole group on Monday, I believe, on the second part of child expectation. So
Yeah, looking forward to that. We're not only out of time, I think we've gone way over time. I mean, this has really been fascinating. A lot of good information and a lot of follow up for all of us. I am actually really looking forward to connecting with you guys, Niki, Jonathan, to see how we can sort of move the needle on this. But in the meantime, thank you all for participating and have a great day.
you too. Have a
Thank you,
good one,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for sharing.
Bye-bye.
Bye.